Good morning. Welcome to Southminster Presbyterian Church. My name is Ludwig. I'm the interim pastor here at the church. This is our first video recording of a sermon that's included in our virtual worship service that we send out each week. Southminster is a welcoming and progressive community of faith, and we invite everyone to be a part of our community. As such, now that we are in a world where things have changed quite a bit and social distancing is the norm, we have created a YouTube channel for anyone to upload videos, and we'll find ways to disseminate that and to make that a part of our community practice and weekly worship. Today's sermon is entitled, Even in These Days, and it comes from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, men and women are not intended to live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and stood him on the highest point of the temple, and he said, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." But Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, a third time, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all of the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said, "All this I will give to you, if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve God only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended to him. All of us have had wilderness moments, times when we have felt very alone, or when the landscape looked unfamiliar and the resources seemed distant and the pathways through seemed unsure. Wilderness moments can come during desolate circumstances. Social distancing, this new concept that we're learning, this isolation that we are experiencing because of COVID-19 is a wilderness experience. And it is an experience that we are all unprepared for. And certainly it was unfathomable that we would be in this place just a month ago. I received a humorous email from Robin Burnham this past week that depicts the reality of our times. It's an email from the cleaning lady. It writes, "Our cleaning lady just called and told us that she's working from home and will send us instructions on what to do. It is okay to laugh, even in your isolation at home. Being social creatures, it is difficult to be isolated from others. Isolation can occur physically, but it can also occur emotionally and spiritually. Wilderness with job uncertainty. Wilderness because of war and the trauma it causes long afterwards. Wilderness from family separation. Wilderness with loneliness and health issues. Wilderness with housing insecurity. Wilderness because of an addiction. Being in the wilderness can be an experience of powerlessness. Likely each of us have had our own wilderness times, short or extended, when the landscape looked unfamiliar and the resources seemed distant and the pathway through was unsure. We have all been in desolate circumstances, and now we find ourselves here again, collectively facing the largest global crisis since the Great Depression. As Barbara Brown Taylor puts it, the wilderness comes to us in many different ways, many different shapes and sizes, that the only way you could truly tell that you are in a wilderness is to look around you and to see what normally you used to count on to save your life is not there. No food, no protections, no earthly power, no special protection, just the Bible. And a spotting devil and a whole bunch of sand. None of us choose to be in the wilderness. I assume that Jesus didn't want to go there as well. But I challenge all of you and me to look back at your life and to think about the times when the lessons you have learned well, or when the insights that you have had that have changed your life, or when you were rooted in trust more deeply. Think about those trying times in your life, and I'm willing to bet that most likely they occurred in some sort of wilderness experience. The wilderness can be a place where memory is stirred, where priorities are examined and trust is evaluated. In our Bible lesson, Jesus draws on the stories that fit him as a child, the stories of the struggles and visions of his people. In doing so, he is able to navigate the isolation experienced being alone for 40 days. Even in his days of being tempted and tormented by Satan, whether historically or allegorically, it does not matter. Even in his days, Jesus was able to use the past to be resilient in the present. In these days, I've been reflecting on my life and ministry and calling from a whole new perspective, glancing backward more than I usually do. And I have been thinking of my mother. My mother only stood 5 foot tall, slender with shoulder-length hair, always neatly groomed. She was a feisty German who could both yodel and play the spoons. And she married an abusive alcoholic. I never really knew where she got her inner strength. She lived a life of adversity and abuse and neglect and influx, and yet she was constantly grounded in the unshakable affirmation of her worth, her love for 5 children, and her purpose in life. Even though the forces around her beat her down at every turn, she somehow was able to survive with a confidence that communicated to us that everything would be okay with her and with our family. Looking back at it, my mother is the sole reason that I became so resilient in my own life. And because she taught me how to believe in myself in ways that others have not shown me. She was the person that has been my strongest source of inspiration. Many of the author Toni Morrison's novels and songs speak to the resiliency during wilderness experiences and to the strength and resolve of her African American characters. Morrison speaks to the response of African American communities to the persistent violence of their time. She writes this: "What was taken by outsiders to be slackness was in fact a full recognition of the legitimacy of forces other than good ones. The purpose of evil was to survive it. And they, the African Americans, survived it because they were determined to survive floods, white people, tuberculosis, famine, and ignorance. They knew anger, but not despair. They knew anger, but not despair. Despair was beneath them." Toni Morrison could have been describing my mother. I will never understand all that it cost my mom to be strong in the midst of so much turmoil around her. At the end, I suppose it cost her health and her life. But I do know that she lived as if despair was never on the table, and that anything less than strength was beneath her. There is a persuasive story in our culture that tells us that we should not trust anyone, that we should stay to ourselves and keep within our own inner circle. But my friends, I will tell you that simply is not true. It has no grounding in reality. The reality is that there are many good people in the world, more good than we could even imagine. And we come to understand that when we are in the wilderness. Look around you. Listen to a different story. While our news today has fearful updates of the virus spread, it also is full of the outpouring of acts of compassion, kindness toward humanity. Neighbors reaching out to check on strangers. College students volunteering. Children making signs of good cheer and hanging them on trees. Donations of food to food banks, charities, and schools is on the rise. When we remember the goodness within ourselves and with each other, that is when we truly become the beloved community. I am so fond of Maya Angelou, as I'm sure you are as well. And one of the famous poems by her has been a constant provision of strength for me over the last couple of weeks. Her famous poem, I Rise. It speaks to the resiliency of the human spirit to rise up during adversity. Her words defy any story that might tell us that we are weak or that we are less than human. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. So welcome to the wilderness, a world of unknowns and isolation, but despair is beneath us. We are part of a beloved community that is Southminster and the world of humanity. And our experience in the wilderness is not without hope or resilience or opportunities to extend compassion or the promise of daybreak. We will rise. Pam Brown, one of our trustees, came to my office this last week at just the right moment to offer me some readings and a prayer. Of course, we kept our 6 feet distance rule, but what a blessing it was for me as a pastor to be the recipient of a prayer for our world, our church, and our community. One of the readings that Pam shared with me was on the concept of social distancing. It was written from Rabbi Yosef Kamefsky of Los Angeles. It occurred to me that this is what it means to be part of the beloved community. Even though we are physically separated, we can find ways to reach out to each other and let each other know that we are not forgotten or forsaken. Rabbi Kamefsky writes, every hand that we don't shake must become a phone call that we place. Every embrace that we avoid must become a verbal expression of warmth and concern. Every inch and every foot that we physically place between ourselves and another must become a thought as to how we might be of help to others. I will never know whether my mother's strength was a burden or a source of joy in her life. I will never know. But perhaps if I can remember her life, I can match her steps. Perhaps we can match the steps of those whose shoulders we stand, those who prepared the way, those who made a way out of no way. those who traveled the wilderness before. Even in these days, my friends, even in these days, we can find not only hope, but deep satisfaction when we draw ourselves closer to one another in ways that we have never done before.